You know, growing the perfect Monstera can be a little more challenging than you might think, but it doesn't have to be hard if you start right. The real art in growing a large Monstera that not only thrives, but also has been set up to grow long-term into the perfect specimen starts from the very beginning. And in this video, I wanted to go over a method I've been using to set up my propagated cuttings so that they have the best chance to grow into the show-stopping plant everyone talks about. So to get this started, we need to discuss what makes a Monstera that's not only beautiful to look at, but grown in a way that will allow you to grow it for years to come. And one of the characteristics that makes a healthy, well-distributed plant is that when it's in its big boy or big girl pot and it has multiple plants per pot, we need all the plants in the pot to face the same direction. And what do I mean by this? It's all about placement from the start. If you look at a stem or a cutting of a Monstera, you can see it has a front and a back. The front is this side that the leaves are facing, and the back is where you find the roots growing from. And when putting your Monstera together after propagating a few cuttings, it's a lot like building a house. We need to know where the front door is, the back, and all the windows before we can break ground. If you don't, then we'll get started, and as we build, well, it's just a mess. So that being said, if your ultimate goal is to grow one plant per pot, then it doesn't really matter how we place our cutting. We can just turn the pot and make it face the way we want. But if our goal is to create a fuller plant from top to bottom that has multiple cuttings in one pot, then the first thing we need to plan for is that all the stems face the same direction. And the second thing we need to accomplish to make this plant a perfect specimen, well, I'll show you that in a second. But before that, I wanted to go over how to get your Monstera started right. And unless we purchase our plant and it's perfect, which if I'm being honest is not likely, because most of the time when you find one in the store, they're started with a bunch of seeds in a cell. They germinate, continue to grow, and the plants end up facing any way you can think of, which is okay if you're growing a bushy little plant and you'll prune it back when it gets a little too big. But what if you want a big Monstera? So the best way to get what we want is to propagate our own cuttings in soil or water. If you decide to propagate your cuttings in soil, I recommend you plant them one plant per pot in a pot as small as possible. A 4-inch pot will do with a soil mix that consists of 70% core and 30% perlite. This mixture will give enough water holding capacity and at the same time provide the proper drainage and aeration for the cuttings at this stage of the grow. The first reason we put only one cutting per pot is so that when they're ready to step up to a larger container, we have the flexibility to adjust them in the larger pot as we like. And the other reason to plant them one cutting per pot is that if one of the cuttings dies, we can just toss the soil from that one pot in the compost bin and we're good. Whereas if you plant 3 cuttings per pot and one dies, and we wanted our final planting to have 3 plants, now we have to create a Frankenstein plant and put it all together. On the other hand, if you decide to propagate your cuttings in water after they've rooted, the first step is transitioning them to soil. And the first challenge we have with cuttings that have been propagated in water, and this goes for other types of cuttings as well, is that we're expecting them to survive the process of going from growing in 100% water, where the cuttings have adapted to that environment and put out water roots, to then being transplanted to soil and going into a drier environment with roots that are not suitable for soil. I have here in front of me these beautiful Monstera cuttings, which I propagated in water about 4 months ago. Now, as we can see, besides the fact that they had a little bout with mealybugs, they've done pretty well after I took these cuttings, placed them in the jar, kept them under grow lights, changed the water about once a week, and started to add a little liquid fertilizer once I started to see roots. So at this point, to transplant them, the first thing we want to do is start by choosing the right pot size. And in this case, the smaller, the better. I'll go with a 4-inch pot and pot them up, with again a mix of 70% core and 30% perlite. Also, as I did when I propagated in soil, I'm putting 1 plant per pot. And during the first week of this transition, I'll keep the soil really moist. And then what I'll do during the 2 weeks that follow is that I'll start to reduce the frequency of waterings so that I can acclimate the cuttings until the point that I'm watering them when the soil's about 50% dry. Now, after a few months, once the propagated cuttings are rooted in, whether you propagated in soil or water and then transplanted them to soil, they're ready to step up to a larger container to help us grow our Monstera. My ultimate goal with this plant is to grow a Monstera in a big 21-inch pot that has 3 plants per pot. So what I'll do is take a 10-inch pot and add enough soil so the top of my 4-inch pots are level with the top of the 10-inch pot. I'm using a mix of 1 part pine bark, 1 part perlite, and 1 part core. And because our cuttings were planted one cutting per pot, we have 3 advantages over having multiple plants in one pot. The first is that we can take the crucial step that we spoke about before, and that's to find the front and the back of each plant and place them in the pot with all the fronts facing the same way. The next advantage we get from using one cutting per pot is that it also gives us the flexibility to place all the plants in a straight line, which when I grow this plant in this 10-inch onto a 14-inch and ultimately a 21-inch pot, it'll allow all the plants an opportunity to grow uniformly so they don't crowd each other. And also, if you haven't noticed, the other advantage we get by propagating these individual cuttings in individual pots is that it allows us to separate them from each other as much as we like. And as the plant grows, it'll give us a wider, fuller plant, not only on the top, but especially towards the bottom. If I didn't grow it this way and provide the spacing, then all 3 cuttings would be starting from almost the same area in the pot, causing the 2 on the outside to want to lean outward if you planted 3, and 2 growing away from each other if you planted 2. They'd be much more crowded and ultimately create a plant that's less full towards the bottom of the pot. So you can see how using these individually planted cuttings gives us the flexibility to really set up our Monstera to grow a nicer plant. And once you've set up your Monstera for success, you're going to want some care tips to keep it growing. So watch this video next to see some of my favorite tips on how to care for a Monstera.